I had P&Ls in the billions. I led teams collectively north of 30,000 people. But as I became more comfortable in that corporate setting, I started to notice toxicity in pockets that I used to admire, people that I looked up to. They never subscribed to this philosophy that I certainly preach now is, someone doesn't have to lose for someone else to win.
Kyle McDowell, former Fortune 10 executive, coveted keynote speaker, and author of the Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling book, Begin with We. 49% of respondents said that Gen Z was difficult to work with, and the reasons they said so: lack of effort, poor communication, easily offended, and entitled.
The list of adjectives very appropriate for many bosses. And I use that word purposely, bosses, not leaders. And the difference now, though, in this generation is my mother passed away from cancer at 63. She was a full-time executive up until weeks before she passed. She was on her deathbed, quite literally, with a laptop. I'll never forget this. She grabbed my hand and she said, "It's not supposed to be like this." She said, "I worked my whole life to get to a point where I could travel and see the world and really enjoy the fruits of my labor. And that's not going to happen." That changed me forever.
That relationship, it just stuck out. I found this online. I was reading about your mother. It said that
you, my friend, have done some research. Holy cow.
begin with we. 3 really simple words put together. And honestly, that's the point, is how simple it is, yet how profound that statement is. While today we are certainly going to talk about how young people can go about being successful in their own career, it's not how they can be successful in corporate America. Of course, they can be successful in corporate America should they choose to, but this is also talking about how you can be successful in your own side hustle, applying it to your own personal life, your family life. Begin with we is a universal truth. None of us can go through this life alone. And I don't know why we're trying to. Why we're trying to deny love on a daily basis. We can't. That's not who we are. I'm using we very intentionally, if you can't tell. If you enjoyed today's conversation and you want to see even more incredible conversations with amazing guests like Kyle, definitely follow along, leave a rating. It helps grow the show, and it helps me attract guests like Kyle. And I can't thank you enough for being a supporter. Thank you for tuning in to the R20s podcast. Without further ado, Kyle McDowell. I don't know why my generation is trying to deny this fundamental truth of humanity, which is we can't do anything by ourselves. It doesn't matter what type of setting we're in. We're denying love of other people. We're denying the friendship of other people. We're denying the cooperation of other people.
Mm-hmm.
What's your initial message to Gen Z? If you had to state it in one simple sentence, why shift away from me and focus on we?
Well, that's a tough question to answer in one sentence, Tom. And for me personally, it took north of 20 years in my career. So I was probably around the age of 40 before I realized the real value that can be found with a we paradigm.
Yeah.
So, I think you started the premise of the question in the right way, and that is with social media and just kind of the environment in which we live today, particularly the social media component. Everyone has a voice that is louder than it used to be. And what does that mean? What I mean by that is, if I was frustrated years ago before the advent of social media, I would tell a couple of friends or I'd stew about it on my own. But now there's this platform or any number of platforms that allow someone to go to the public and say whatever it is they want to say. And I think it gives this impression that their opinion and their feelings actually matter more than they really do.
Yeah.
Which the logical next step is, well, if my opinions and my feelings are so important, then I must be very, very important, like the center of my own universe and everyone else's universe.
Yeah.
So I think it's a slippery slope from our ability to share our feelings, our wants, desires, and things that energize us, which is a wonderful tool. Social media is a wonderful tool for, but it's a slippery slope in that it ends up landing in a place that I am the only focus.
Yeah.
And we is never even in the conversation. And it took me, as I mentioned, many, many years to get there. And it's something I still struggle with. I think we all do.
Absolutely.
But I think that's the biggest problem driving most businesses today is the intersection of millennials, Gen X's, and baby boomers. You've got some old school leaders trying to adopt to this new paradigm, this I-focused paradigm. And you've got those Gen Xers caught right in the middle of it all, which is a recipe for some dysfunction and dysfunctional cultures.
Yeah. Well, when you have 4 generations all at once in the workplace, it's historically been challenging. But now throw in the added element that the baby boomers didn't really have the internet or social media till
Right.
well into their adult lives. And now you're having the first generation who's had all of this for their entire life.
Yeah.
And just viewing the differences between the two, you can clearly see the distinction. And it's becoming more and more evident. I was just having a conversation yesterday, and we were talking about how big four accounting firms like Deloitte and EY are having to actually schedule soft skill trainings for these
Oh,
incoming employees because they have no idea how to communicate with each other.
yeah.
Um, that's unheard of.
Right.
But it goes back to this idea that we're all focused on our own little world. And
Yeah.
when we're in our own little world, what kind of message is being promoted to us? And one thing that I see a lot, I have TikTok, I'm a big user. One thing I see all the time is, what can I do to make the most money as possible?
Yeah.
Here's 50 side hustles you need to start doing today if you want
Right.
to break out of the matrix.
Yeah.
And as a person in business, as a person who studied finance and mathematics in school, I watch all of these and I say to myself, 99% of these are not real, but people are
Facts.
viewing them and they're looking at them as gospel.
Right.
And now it's no wonder that you have this me type of culture being developed, especially with Gen Z in the workplace, because they're saying to themselves, I don't really need to be here. I can go off and do my own thing. I can make a ton of money doing it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we'll get to that a little bit later, but I want to touch on your transformation because I know that you also talked about how when you were in your 20s, money was the focus and it was a focus and it should
Yeah.
be a focus. I want to break that immediately is that
Right.
money is something and it needs to be
We like
appreciated,
money.
it needs to be valued. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not everything. So
Mhm.
can you talk about when you were in your 20s going through your own professional career? How did
Yeah.
your definition of success evolve over time? And what were some of the factors that promoted you to make this change to defining success now as building these solid relationships and impacting other people's lives?
Yeah. Great question, man. So like so many in my generation, particularly those that come from a middle class background, my family, I grew up, not poor, but certainly not wealthy.
Hmm.
I think we took one vacation, literally my entire childhood. We rented an RV and drove through the southeastern United States. Um, I I was very focused on me. I entered the workforce, corporate. I entered corporate America at the age of 18. I actually interviewed for a role when I was 17, hoping that I would have a birthday in between the time I interviewed and the time an offer would come.
Yeah.
And it happened that way. Interviewed in June, birthdays in July. Started this with this small bank in August. Actually, be 30 years this month when
Wow.
I entered the corporate world. And I was a hard charger, and I got that from my parents. Had incredible work ethic. They worked sun up to sundown. Uh, they define work ethic for me. So for me, it was very natural to go straight from high school, full time student, and working full time, paying my way through my undergrad, and climbing the corporate ladder. It was 100% ego driven. I see that now. I didn't
Yeah.
see that then. It was 100% ego driven. And we could talk about money and the components that make that ego driven, but certainly money was a huge factor.
Yeah.
And I'm with you, Tom. I don't want anyone to leave this conversation thinking that I am demonizing money or that I don't get it, because I still like money a whole lot.
Yeah.
But I think the methods by which we travel and use to get there, that has evolved for me incredibly so. So I found myself taking on bigger and bigger roles in corporate America. I was not a saboteur of others, but I was never shy to shine my own light. I was never shy to poke my own chest out to say, I did this, I did that. Look at the results I delivered, when nearly every single time it was a team that was with me that delivered those results.
Yeah.
But I noticed myself, and it was probably in my early, probably late 30s. I noticed that I started to feel a little apathetic towards the environments I was actually creating. Now,
Yeah.
by most standards, I was incredibly successful in corporate America. I mean, for some context, in my last two roles, I led teams collectively north of 30,000 people. I
Wow.
had P&Ls in the billions. I had operating expense budgets in the billions. Um, Huge teams, huge scope and sphere of influence, and huge ego.
Yeah.
I was a pound my fist on the desk kind of guy, but I always delivered, man. My results were always always good. And if they weren't, they were corrected very quickly. I'm very proud of my track record of delivery.
Yeah.
But as I became more comfortable in that corporate setting, I started to notice toxicity in pockets that I used to admire, in people that I looked up to. A lot of duplicity, a lot of self-serving, a lot of, and there, yes, saboteurs. There were people that would quite easily make up stories about others to make themselves, they never subscribed to this philosophy that I certainly preach now is, someone doesn't have to lose for someone else to win.
Yeah.
And that was certainly not the case in my exposure. So it was probably late 30s. So in my career, I was probably in corporate America at this point, maybe 13, 14, 15, maybe approaching 20 years. And I'd seen so much toxicity, including by those that were my leaders, my bosses. I made a decision, and it was largely driven by the passing of my mother, which really changed my paradigm about work in many ways. I made the decision, if I was ever going to be given the autonomy to lead in a way that I had never been led, be damned everything about I, and be very, very we focused. And that was the word that kept coming to me as I took on the new role that maybe we'll get into later.
Yeah.
Is how do I get the most out of everyone around me, but have them feel the same level of fulfillment, passion, and energy that I felt when I focused. Well, be careful what you wish for, because I was given an opportunity to lead an organization of about 15,000 people. It was a $7 billion program for which I was responsible. And maybe it was fear of being in over my head, or maybe I was sticking to my commitment to myself about doing things differently. But I approached that job very differently from day one. And my friend, the last 6 years of my time in corporate America, provided so much joy and satisfaction, exponentially more than the first 25 years.
Yeah.
And it is 100% because of my shift to a we-oriented paradigm.
That's so awesome to hear. And I know a lot of young people just listen to that story and it probably went right over their heads because
Yeah.
it's so hard to comprehend. First of all, being in an organization that has billions of dollars to play with, but you're the person who is responsible for those billions of dollars. And at the same time, you're responsible for thousands of people. I can't even imagine the amount of pressure that you're feeling in the workplace and also having to take that home. I can very easily imagine it impacting you mentally, physically. And I commend you so much for being able to make this shift. That's really strong, in my opinion. And I really hope that people can replicate that type of strength in their own personal lives. And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Dude, I would say it this way: like, if anything just said resonates, or if it went over your head, here's the Reader's Digest. Here's the real version, REEL, real version,
Yeah.
because we consume content in such bite-sized portions now. It's really this simple: having very aggressive goals for yourself. It's quite okay. You must have them if
Yeah.
you want to make a lot of money. Go for it. I am not demonizing being aggressive about your future and being even slightly arrogant about your future. But what I am saying is the path to get there is so much more fulfilling and satisfying when it is driven by a we mindset versus an I mindset. The goal, and believe it or not, man, the results actually become easier to obtain.
I don't doubt it.
And you said this at the beginning of our conversation. It's like nothing is accomplished with an I focus. It's so much more easy to accomplish things when it's a we focus. And it just took me a long time to get there. That's the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah. And I think we do need to be a bit arrogant and a little bit kind of crazy to achieve these wild, outlandish dreams, or at least wild and outlandish to everyone else. If you don't have this undying passion and undying belief in yourself, to me, that just means, first of all, you're not really into it. And second of all, I don't think you're ever going to do it because you're going to quit eventually if you don't have this belief in yourself that no matter how long it takes, you can do it.
Yeah.
And I think in the corporate world, where there's this disconnect between the manager and the new employees of Gen Z, is Gen Z says to themselves very quickly, I'm not feeling it. I have no interest in getting into it. And then instead of the manager trying to promote Gen Z to maybe be a better team player to get into it more, they just kind of say, all right, this kid's the worst. And to kind of support that with some data. And first of all, I want to make sure that everything that we talk about is data driven, because I love number 8 in the book, which is we challenge each other, but diplomatically. So I want
It's
to
also
issue a
my favorite.
challenge to yeah.
Yep.
I
It's
want to
also
issue a challenge to Gen Z at the end of this conversation, but I want to make sure it's done diplomatically based
Mhm.
on data. And the first thing I want to touch on is something I saw in the New York Post, and they were interviewing various managerial positions, high level executives, mid managers. 49% of respondents said that Gen Z was difficult to work with all or most of the time. And
Yeah.
the reasons they said so: lack of effort, lack of motivation, lack of productivity, poor communication, easily offended, dishonest, and entitled. Now, I know those are constant adjectives used to describe people of my generation, but I want to try to support my generation and play
Yeah.
a devil's advocate for us.
Yeah.
And I don't think that defines us uniformly. Not at all. From your position, what do you see when you look at organizations in terms of how they handle their new employees, especially with Gen Z now? What do you think managers are doing wrong with their treatment of young employees? And how can they start to change so that young employees can feel more welcome when they're at work? They can feel more engaged. And maybe it's not what they want to do for the rest of their life, but
Right.
they can start seeing work as like, what's better than getting paid to learn? And then you can take that skill set and you can do it on your own eventually. That
Amen.
sounds like a pretty good deal to me.
Yeah.
So,
Right
how
on.
do you help young people recognize that?
Well, first, Tom, I can't go too far without thinking and just kind of interjecting. The list of adjectives that you just ran through, I think, are also very appropriate for many bosses
Yeah.
in the corporate world.
Yep.
And I use that word purposely, bosses, not leaders. Um, so I think the problem is so systemic in that, look, for 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 decades, if not centuries, the company was responsible for setting the tone, the culture, the vibe, the energy inside of the
Yeah.
workplace. And the worker had to adopt to that for many, many reasons. One of the strongest, I think, is with the advent of work from home and how that's the proliferation of work from home, especially since the pandemic. The worker today has far more options than they did in decades past.
Yeah.
So the company set the tone, and you had to subscribe to that or not work here. Today, reality says the workforce is setting the tone, and if the company doesn't kind of uh, not conform, but at least acknowledge that this transition is happening, if not already happened, the worker is going to say, just as you indicated, I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
And the difference now, though, in this generation is, whereas when I was unhappy, and I'm certainly unhappy throughout many patches of my career, in most cases, I felt comfortable enough to talk to someone inside the workplace, to express my concerns, my beefs, if you will, whatever my grievances were,
Yeah.
not in a way to say or else, but just to say, like, this is something you should be aware of, boss. And if you're not comfortable hearing my feedback, that's fine. I'll go back to my cubicle.
Yeah.
And then I would, and you just kind of swallow it. Well, today, if we're not on a level playing field, and there's this thing in my book I talk about called the leadership gap, where what's good for the boss is not good for the team, and vice versa. I mean, we have total different standards. I call that the leadership gap, and I think it's at its widest point in probably history.
Yeah.
Um, the worker now can say, I'm not feeling it, and I can go down the street if it's a brick and mortar type role and find something the same day. It's just that easy today. And if not, I've got a phone and I've got Instagram and I've got TikTok, or what, as you mentioned earlier, so many quote unquote influencers. There are opportunities abound that just didn't exist
Yeah.
years ago. So I think that's what's driven the scenario that we're in today. Which, so you have a choice as a manager or a leader in the corporate world today, and that is, you can hang on to ways of the past and managing people the way you've always managed, and watch yourself slowly fail,
Yeah.
because this tidal wave of change in terms of the demographic and the profile and the paradigm of the people and of these profiles, it's not changing. And if anything, it may become more extreme. So that choice is, continue to do the same old thing, serve yourself a status quo sandwich, and find yourself being replaced by the very people that you are not vulnerable enough to lead in a more effective way.
Yeah.
Or you can say, the times are changing, and if I can rally the folks that work with me and around me toward a common cause, in other words, we have to first agree that everyone comes to work not necessarily looking at rainbows and unicorns and they're super excited to be there, but they certainly don't come to work to fail.
Yeah.
They don't come to work to do a bad job. They may not give their all, but that doesn't mean they came to do a bad job. So they ultimately value success and perform and high performance. Well, as a leader, I want people on my team to value success and high performance. So we have common ground. So how do we now land in a place or come together that we can have this no leadership gap and we're operating from the same series of beliefs or truths that, and one of those truths is we want to be successful.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's quite okay for the Gen Z person to say to the manager, look, I'm just here to pay my bills long enough to go do XYZ. No problem. Let's make it the best couple of months or years that we can so you have some satisfaction. You can learn a little bit in the process. Maybe you haven't charted your future out. I can help with that.
Yeah.
Um, so I truly believe, sure, maybe a little bit of behavior modification on the Gen Z side wouldn't hurt, but I think the lion's share of the modification, and it's not popular among people my age to say this, it must be done in the leadership ranks. It must be done in the older generations, or else they're going to find themselves lapped.
Yeah. There's a lot I want to touch on there. And one of the first ones I want to touch on is work from home, because it's new and it's impacting a lot of people in my generation as to what kind of experience do I want? Do I want to find a job that's fully remote? Do I want the hybrid, or do I want fully in person?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see the reaction to the three different styles. Personally, I
Yeah.
do hybrid and I really enjoy it, where I get that work-life balance, where there are days where I don't have to worry about getting home from my commute. I don't have to worry about additional stress of making it home for dinner and stuff like that. But I also get the in-person communication with my boss, and I get to build that sense of trust. I get to spend time with people
Huge.
that I really enjoy being with. And at the same time, like I talked about, I get to learn skill sets.
Yeah.
And if I want to walk away eventually, I feel pretty confident in the skill sets I'm developing. What
Good
I've
for you.
seen from people who are working remotely the entire time is, if that's the type of lifestyle that you want, where you just want to get the paycheck and you want to be able to do your own thing, it's working out really well for them. But
Mhm.
for anybody that's looking for that experience where they don't really know what they want to do and they're just trying to do something to get their feet wet and they're trying to get some experience, it's not working for them at all,
Right. Yeah.
because they're working with a boss who is never going to meet them unless it's virtual. Maybe they
Mhm.
get called in for a corporate retreat once a year.
Mhm.
And now you're trying to have communication with somebody who doesn't really know anything about you,
Yeah.
and they're not really interested in speaking with you. It's
Right.
hard to call them, it's hard to even communicate with them. And I think that point translates really well into one of the biggest things I've noticed with my generation is that I don't think it's a problem that we don't care. I think we really do care. And like you said, I don't think there's a lot of people out there who wake up every day saying, like, I have no desire to be successful.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what it is. I think people have that desire
Of
for
course.
any avenue of life.
Yep.
But what I think we're struggling with really hard is defining the vision for success.
Mhm.
And that's why I wanted to build a show around that idea, because defining success for yourself, you get told, oh, it's so individualized, which is true, but then you never get
Mhm.
an example of what it looks like for an individual.
Mhm.
And what I loved what you said is, when you wrote down the principles, it was just evident to you that this is going to be something you wanted to pursue for the next phase of your career.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until you wrote it down that you really said to yourself, wow, I have something here and I can go with it.
Yeah.
When I did the same kind of thing, I literally sat down and I wrote out what would be my perfect day. And I wrote down
Wow.
in individual little minute details. What does it smell like when I wake up? Does it smell like fresh pancakes? Does it
Wow.
look, what am I looking at, and everything like that? Vivid detail. And that's my roadmap. And that's my guide to say to myself, okay, what am I doing today? And does that fit into the vision of getting me to that perfect day?
Mhm.
And if it doesn't, cut it out.
Lose
And
it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you just describe the impact of setting in stone what the goal is to giving you direction, and how it personally changed your own philosophy on life?
Yeah, and it was situational for me. As I mentioned, and maybe I should back up just for a little bit of context for your audience.
Mhm.
So, the principles we're discussing are the 10 We's. They're the principles that are the foundation for my book,
Yeah.
Begin with We, and they are also the principles that changed my life. And I'm told from complete strangers to very close confidants that the principals have changed their lives as well.
Yeah.
I get chills when I say that. The night before, I was to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of a new role that I had taken. And this role had come after I had that epiphany I shared a bit ago, when I said if I ever got the chance to lead with complete autonomy, and lead in a different way, I was going to take it. So now these two stories are now coming together, right?
Yeah.
So the night before I was to meet with these 40 or 50 folks, it was gut check time, and honestly had no idea what I was going to say. I just knew I needed to appeal to this team in a way that was that assured them, um, I was not here to save them, but I also wasn't here to sabotage or bring them down, and I could not be successful because it was a huge role,
Yeah.
without their help. And I needed them to believe, at least halfway believe, that they couldn't be successful without my help.
Mhm.
Well, the only way to land on that common ground is to establish, um, our what I called at the time. I called them my rules of the road. So it's midnight, in Lawrence, Kansas, the night before, and I didn't know what I was going to say. My laptop in my lap. I was still wearing the same suit I had on the entire day, and I was going to. My goal was to create a PowerPoint, just a presentation to share with the team the next day.
Yeah.
And I just started typing, and I could not be more honest when I tell you, no planning whatsoever. After a couple of hours, I had 10 sentences in front of me. They each began with the word we. And I'm not super creative, so the 10 we's were branded. But I didn't even I called them our guiding principles. They later became a little more sexy with, principles for building and sustaining a culture of excellence, although I use the word excellence a lot.
Yeah.
Tom, the entire presentation was in black and white, because I felt like if you can't subscribe to these principles, then I don't want you on my team. And for your audience, they are super fundamental. But
Yeah.
here's the value. Back to your point around documenting what your perfect day looks like, or what your ideal day looks like. This was my shot at saying, this is how we will be viewed. This is how others will see us. This is how we operate. And I was very clear to say, these govern how we treat each other first.
Yeah.
Because I believe if you're functional behind the scene and you're high functioning, there's no way you're not going to be high functioning externally to those you serve, your clients. So there was kind of a transition, or a real transformation for me. It took me many months. So I shared it the next morning with this team. I would say half were super energized. A quarter of the team was probably, skeptical, but possible. But the last quarter were serious detractors, dude. They just, you could just see it on their face. Here's another guy in a starch shirt, some shiny shoes, telling us about what he's going to do for us and how we're going to be this great team. And they'd seen it before. There was a lot of turnover in that role before I joined,
Yeah.
the same position. But here's the thing. In my life, Bud, the worst thing you could ever call me, the worst insult that I can think of, is hypocrite. I don't want to be viewed as someone who talks a talk but doesn't walk that walk. So when I announced these principles and said these will be our rules of the road, I knew at that point, and I used the word we so strongly, I was under a microscope at that point. I must behave in a way that is consistent with these principles, which was mostly easy. And I'll share some examples if you like of when it became really challenging.
Yeah.
But here's the beautiful thing, though. If I really don't want to be called a hypocrite, I can't just leave these principles at the door when I leave work. I need to live these principles in my day-to-day life,
Yeah.
my outside of work life, or else I am being a hypocrite. So it just kind of started as, how do you want to be viewed? And I use the word legacy a lot. I think leaders, we all have a legacy, and I don't think we acknowledge that and think about that as much as we should. Because if we did, we might make different decisions. Because if you look back at your life and view the decisions you made, there's going to be some that you're not going to be proud of. But in the moment, if you're there enough to recognize you do have a legacy, your decision at that time might be different.
Yeah.
So that was a transformation for me, and it started with writing them down. That's the first step. What do you want to stand for?
Getting started is always the hardest part, but it's the most important. And I do want to talk about those challenges, and I would love you to go into them, but I want to frame it in a lens for the audience, and that lens being the time horizon you give to allow the message to set in.
Yeah, great
And
question.
when young people are trying to make a change for themselves, let's see young people pick up the book and they read the 10 Wees and they say to themselves, oh, these are honestly not that bad, which I think is brilliant on your part because you have to make the message easy to understand for everybody. And
That's
they
right.
are incredibly easy to understand.
Yeah.
But implementation is different than understanding. And
Yeah.
I think we give ourselves a really short time horizon to implement. And if we feel like we don't do it to our definition of success, then we give up and we throw it in the trash.
Right on.
How did you navigate these challenges and what were the challenges? And how did you give them the proper time horizon to let them flourish?
Yeah, so I'll be completely vulnerable with you. I suffer from a bit of imposter syndrome from time to time.
Yeah.
And when I introduced these principles, as I mentioned, 50 were pretty energetic, 50% was pretty energetic, and a quarter was kind of on board. So 3 out of 4 people were essentially in my camp. I didn't believe them. I really, really didn't believe them. Even my own direct reports, because Tom, and I was very clear to say, I'm not forcing these principles down your throat, but I will say, if you can't subscribe to them, I need to help you find another job.
No.
Because if you can't get down with, we do the right thing, we lead by example all the way through, then you're probably not a good fit culturally. And it probably took me more than a year to really believe the momentum and the things I was being told was real. Things were real. I would go to, we had 11 locations. I would go to a location and all of a sudden there would be the 10 Wees plastered on a wall. There would be, without my asking or urging, they started the We Awards twice a year. They recognize people who are kind of caught living one of the Wees or exemplifying any one of the Wees.
Yeah.
There's never been a more true statement than what you said, that it takes time. And I truly believe, I was talking to my wife about this last night. I truly believe, especially in younger generations today, those that are wildly successful are not necessarily so because they have some extra special talent or because they found some secret, although, those scenarios obviously exist. They're the people that just keep pounding away, man.
Yeah.
They just don't stop. So, for me, unveiling these principles, I knew it was a long, long road to hoe, and I was still skeptical when they started to take hold, whether or not it was authentic and legitimate. But now I'm just, overwhelmingly convinced because I'm approached by strangers now because of the book.
No.
But I would just encourage your audience, though, back to the context of the question, though, is if you can look in the mirror and say that you've actually given this your all, your honest try, like you don't have anything else to give on whatever the topic is, whatever the endeavor you're trying, if you can honestly say that, then move on.
Yeah.
But you have to have the wherewithal to actually ask the question of yourself, right?
Yeah.
And there's this concept I talk about in the book called the mirror of truth, and it's very similar.
Yeah.
And it's a metaphor for just really deep self-reflection. Did I treat people the way I wanted to be treated? Am I proud of the way I handled that conversation? When I was walking down the hallway in the office, did I give everybody a look in the eye, or was my face buried in my phone, showing them that they're not quite as important what's going on my phone?
Yeah.
I didn't do that for many, many years. You have to ask the question to be able to really genuinely ascertain if you're in the right place, heading in the right direction or not.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
It absolutely is a choice. And I kind of want to flip the question and go back to a topic that you brought up in legacy. When I think I'm kind of pessimistic in terms of when I just talked about how time horizon and you have to give things time. When it comes to legacy, and I think of long time horizons, for me personally, and you don't have to agree with this, the audience doesn't have to agree with this.
Of course.
I think our legacy diminishes if we're thinking like thousands of years. It's inevitable that the actions that we did are going to, I don't want to say forgotten because it's kind of mean, but they're going to be
That's a fact.
lost in history.
Yes.
And I think it's this interesting philosophy that I try to practice every day where a lot of people want to impact the world on a grand scale. And that's how I view people's opinion on legacy. They want to leave this immense legacy, they call it.
I'm with you. Yeah.
To me, I want to impact somebody's world or some people's world, a small cohort in my little corner of the universe that I can leave this legacy that in the immediate term, when I'm long gone, my impact will be felt by those people.
Yes.
And it's exactly like you talked about. They'll remember the conversations that we had.
Yeah.
They'll remember how I treated them. And maybe even one day, knock on wood, they'll be like, oh yeah, that guy, he was a good guy. If that could be said about me at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty solid life. So when it comes to your opinion on legacy and viewing it in the corporate world, outside in the personal world, how do you go about just being mindful of the little actions that you're taking, like walking in the hallway with your head down on your phone, not paying attention to anyone you're talking to,
Yeah.
just being present in the moment? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah. And it's, I would be lying if I didn't insert this caveat to my answer. So I still run a business here in Tampa that, at peak we'll have 500 or 600 employees. Currently we're around a couple hundred, 250 employees.
Mm-hmm.
And as I walk into the office every day, the days that I'm in that office, I have to tell myself, let's go, pick it. Let's go.
Yeah.
You got, and sometimes that means putting a smile on your face when inside I don't have a smile.
Yeah.
And the point of that is not to pat myself on the back or say that I'm some actor. The point is nothing worth having comes easily. Nothing. Everything worth having is the product of overcoming one or more challenges. So in that scenario, the worth having part is having a thriving business where people want to come to work. They want to be their best. They want to find their next step in their life. They want to get promoted, take on more, or at least learn something that they can take to another place. That's the worthwhile part. The work is, I don't necessarily feel like being that guy today.
Yeah.
But nothing worth having is easy. So if I want that for my people, and by the way, if they're successful, I'm successful. So of course I need to put that energy in. So that's a long way of answering the premise of the question. Is it takes work. It's a choice. And truly, there are days where I'm not even very good at pumping myself up, but it's that conscious thought that you must have to get those results.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I go around. That's a roundabout way of saying, it's you'll never reach a destination that you don't set out to reach, right?
Yeah.
So for you, it was, what does my day look like? My perfect day. So you started the steps of getting to that perfect day. Like, what would it take to get there?
Yeah.
I have to disagree with you in that. I think you're you're pessimistic, because that sounded very optimistic, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a fact that over time, our shine and the importance that we had on the world for most of us diminishes.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with Meditations by Marcus Aurelius?
Never read it, but familiar with the work. Yeah.
Okay. I just picked it up myself less than a year ago, and it changed my life.
Wow.
It really changed my life. Here's why. So Marcus Aurelius, this was written nearly 2,000 years ago. It was essentially his journal. And at the time, he was the emperor, and he was the most he's the most powerful man, arguably, in the world. A stud on the battlefield, just led an army, and was really by accounts of that time very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Every evening he would leave the battlefield or wherever he was, and he would journal with no intention of this journal ever becoming public. And now it's one of the best-selling books of all time.
Wow.
And throughout that book, he talks about the importance of not having an ego, because everyone that cares about you today and that puts you on this pedestal, everyone that kind of showered him with praise, they're going to be dead one day, just like he will. But here's a guy that was thoughtful enough and kind of cerebral enough to say, yeah, I've got all the lavish surroundings, the purple robes, all these things. I command giant army and we conquer places, but none of this is going to matter in a number of years.
Yeah.
So when I say legacy, you nailed it, and you would define it very, very similar to me. It's the circle of people that I have a chance to impact. That's the legacy, right? If I pass tomorrow, are there going to be 3 people at my funeral or 300?
Yeah.
And the number of people is not a sign of your impact on the world.
No.
But at this age, especially, when you're 90, things are a little bit different. But at this age, I would like to think I've touched enough people that there'll be standing room only.
No.
And that, I think, that's how I define my legacy. And it's not my impact on the world; it's my impact on those around me. Because there's a pyramid effect that says, for every person I touch, they touch someone as well, and the numbers just get bigger as you go. And it has to start somewhere. So why can't it be me?
Yeah. Exponential growth. I mean,
Exponential, my
start
man.
with
Yep.
2, 2 squared, 4, keep going. I
Imagine that. Like
immense,
compounding interest.
immense compound interest. We could have a whole conversation about the power of
I bet we
compound
can. You'll
interest.
talk circles around me. I bet you would.
Ego is just
It's the enemy,
it's
dude.
it is the enemy. And
Yeah.
it made me think of this anecdote that a friend's dad had told me. It's a bit of a dark story, but it has to do all with ego and focusing on your world and not other people's worlds. And the story goes along the lines of he was working at this company. I honestly forget what kind of company it was, but there was a man there, and he viewed himself as indispensable. He was one of those employees that was there sun up to sundown, never going home, always working 7 days a week. And the man died while he was at work.
Oh,
And this guy was mid 40s, just in the middle of his life. And, this is the type of guy that viewed himself as being indispensable and was
yeah.
viewed at the company he was at as,
Yeah.
oh, if this guy were to leave, or ironically enough, if he were to pass away, the whole company would fall apart.
Nope.
And the real kicker of the story was the guy got replaced the next day, and it was as if nothing happened.
Yeah.
And when it comes to ego, that story always sticks with me. I like to think that man thought he was really impacting the world and he was doing the best that he could. Um, but there's more to life than just that one aspect of our character. And
So true.
once we open it up to other people and we start to allow these other perspectives into it, you never know the impact that you're going to make on other people if you take the attention off of your own personal job, you focus on other jobs and everything like that.
Man, I feel badly for his children if he had any, his family. I mean,
Yeah.
it's and for him, Tom, I mentioned earlier that there was a scenario with my mother that had a huge impact on my kind of how I viewed my work, and it's
Mhm.
very similar to the story you just told. My mother passed away from cancer at 63,
Oh my.
and she was a full-time executive up until I guess weeks before she passed.
Mhm.
She was on her deathbed, quite literally, with a laptop. And one day she grabbed my hand. This is when we knew the end was near, and I'll never forget this. It was, more than a dozen years ago. She's grabbed my hand and she said, "It's not supposed to be like this."
No.
And I said, "What do you mean, Mom?" She said, "I worked my whole life to get to a point where I could travel and see the world and really enjoy the fruits of my labor, and that's not going to happen."
Yeah.
Uh, and brother, that changed me forever in two ways. How I viewed my identity is something you talked about with Chad Hennings on another one of your podcasts.
Mhm.
How I viewed my identity. My work is not who I am, and I am not my work.
Mhm.
That's part one. But the other part was I wanted to make sure I created a work environment that didn't make people feel as if they had to work themselves to death.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're not accountable for results. I'm not saying I'm going to be a hard ass from time to time. I'm not saying any of those things, but I am saying you shouldn't fear coming to work. You shouldn't dread seeing your boss. You shouldn't think, what's going to happen if I miss this meeting,
No.
because there are things much more important. And that little that story you just told is so powerful, but it's too common as well.
Yeah. I
It's a
think
shame.
you're the anomaly too. You
How
share
so?
you share a story in the book where you're talking about the kid who he's like my age. I think he said he was 22, and he told you that he wanted to be a pilot, and you embraced him and you told
Oh,
him that's awesome. Like
yeah,
we're gonna help you get there.
yeah,
And when I read that, I was kind of like taken aback. I was just like, I know so many people right now who are afraid to just tell their boss that they made a small mistake. Now, if they told
oh,
their boss that their goal isn't to be here for the end of time,
yeah,
I think their relationship would instantly fracture. And it's just it's such a breath of fresh air to read that you were so understanding of this kid's
yeah,
dream and
yeah,
that you promoted him to be the best version of himself.
yeah,
Because I think I don't know if it's ego driven, I don't know if it's just lack of understanding, but that leadership gap, like you talked about, where
yeah.
there's this difference between the generations where we have this one vision of our own lives where we want to take control of it,
Mhm.
and there's this other one that's saying no, you fall into the system.
Yeah.
And you touched on it before where it's this, I don't want to call it archaic, but it's just old school way of thinking
Mhm.
that they don't want to
Mhm.
evolve with the times. I think that's why I think your book is so effective, is because It's
Thank you.
evolving with the times, and you're showing people that no, this isn't the guidebook to how to be successful in corporate America. It's the guidebook to be successful in life, and that's what I
Amen.
really appreciate about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And you, maybe you're the anomaly actually, because your observations for how old are you, Tom?
I'm 23.
I mean, respect, tons of respect.
Thank you.
Um, have you heard the expression, they pay you to lose your dreams? They pay you to forget your dreams?
I heard you talk about this on another podcast,
Did
and
you?
I
And it's
that
true.
conversation was incredible when you talked about that. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's true. They pay you to lose your dreams. And the fellow that you mentioned, he had other dreams, but he still had needs and a family to support at that moment.
Hmm.
I had needs in terms of that position. He was a supervisor for us. I had a need. It's naive of me to think he's going to retire as a supervisor 20 years from now. He's going to leave
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah.
So who wins by me not offering to help him? Uh, who really wins? I don't win because he's now apathetic and disgruntled and is negative, kind
Hmm.
of certainly towards me. I don't win because I have a guy that doesn't trust me and thinks that I'm probably out to get him because his tenure will be short with us. I look at it very differently. I say this: um, authenticity plus relatability equals trust.
Yeah.
And if I have a team member tell me they want to do something else, they're being authentic. I appreciate that. And I can relate to that because throughout my entire career, I wanted to do something different. I always wanted to take on more.
Yeah.
So if we're authentic with one another and I can relate to the scenario that you're sharing with me, you want to do something different, we automatically should have trust.
Yeah.
Um, and it's true. There are a number of times throughout my career, I have offered to help others with their resume to help them find another job. Um, that doesn't mean I'm going to allow you to slack and not perform while you're here. My expectations are still the same, but I
Mhm.
think those expectations are almost always more easily met or less difficult to obtain if they know the guy in the corner office really gives a shit about them,
Yeah.
not only about the results, but about them. And by the way, if you care about someone, uh, if you care about the person more than the results, the person recognizes that. They
Yeah.
thrive under that. And guess what comes next? The results.
Yep.
I appreciate the throwback and the kind words, but
Of course.
I really believe if you just focus on the boss side of being a leader, it's so short sighted. You can be successful, you
Yeah.
can, but at what cost? Who do you alienate? How long can you be successful? And what is that legacy?
Yeah.
And I think that's not a situation I want to be in.
Me neither. And I kind of want to
Good
bring
for
it
you.
back to thank you. I kind of want to bring it back to something I said in the beginning is I want to issue that diplomatic challenge to my generation, and it's be the leader that you want to be.
Bingo.
It's we talked all about what's going on in our world right now. And if there's something in the culture, if there's something in the system that you don't like, change it. Go for
So
it.
true.
Be the person who's going to instigate that next wave so that no one else ever has to go through this again. There never has to
That's
be
right.
this generational shift. And I'm sure time will tell. I'm sure there will be with whatever technology comes next,
Right.
AI disrupting everything. But for this point in time, leave that legacy right now. And I think that's my final message to my generation. And again, I really love everything that we talked about in terms of the corporate side of things. But I want to transition over a little bit more towards the family aspect of it too,
Yeah.
because I find it so fascinating that you were surprised when you heard people come up to you and they said that they're applying the we principles to their own family lives.
Yeah.
Because that was actually one of my first thoughts once I got to like we
Really?
three. Yeah, I said to myself like, if I were a dad right now, I would be actively telling my children to start living like this, and this is how we're going to operate as a family. And I think it just has to do with the language in the book,
Yeah.
where even in family settings, I've read so many statistics about how young kids, even when they're still living with their parents all the time, there's only like 15 minutes of face-to-face family time per day.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to be a functioning family, you're trying to be the best family man, family woman that you could be, you have to have this we oriented goal around a
Mhm.
family.
Mhm.
And I think if people would apply it and think of it in I had this finance professor who I loved, and she always touched on like second level thinking. It's like you read the book and you say to yourself, wow, I could definitely apply this to my work life and I could see
Yeah.
how this applies. But you take that second level thinking, third level thinking, and you say,
Yeah.
okay, how can I apply this to my other relationships? How can I apply this to my side hustle? How can I apply this to just playing pickup basketball or something like that?
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
can do it in everything, and you just
Yep.
have to be perceptive enough to be able to transition to other parts of your life. So
Right.
again, I really want to compliment you that the
Thank you.
book is incredible. I can't really say it enough. I have it right here.
Wow. Thank you,
It's
man.
of
Thank you.
course in the nicest way. It's an easy read.
It is. Oh
I
yeah.
read through it, and I was at my apartment the other day, and my roommates saw me reading it, and I started at like 11, and I was over halfway done by like 10. Not 10. That makes no sense with math. I was starting at 11. I was like halfway through by like 12, and they were like, "How?" And I was just, it's just, it makes sense to me.
Thank
I
you.
didn't have to really study it too hard, and it just felt natural. It just felt like a message
Yeah.
that a lot of people should hear. I just want to
Yeah.
compliment you again on that. I think it's great.
Thank you. And that was not accidental. In fact, if you may recall in the introduction, I even say this is not written as like a fancy MBA textbook.
Yeah.
Because again, that's not authentic. And by the way, you talk about second and third level thinking. This is something I'm so keen to talk about. Usually, is like we even expect people to talk differently in the workplace.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not saying the workplace is ripe for 4-letter words or swear words, but um, I mean, I can't recall the last time I came home and said to my wife, how those deliverables go today?" Right?
Yeah.
We had some action items to cover from last evening's right? We don't even talk the same, so we're already filtering people and expecting them to be different soon as they step in the workplace, virtual or otherwise. Which
Yeah.
I think again, authenticity plus relatability equals trust. So I don't expect you to be authentic because I want you to speak in a way that you're not comfortable speaking or that's not normal to you. And I think that disadvantages certain demographics also.
Yeah.
So it's intentional, man. Relatability. If I spoke with 14-letter words and waxed poetic on, you pick the topic that most people can't even relate to. There's no trust, and no one's going to follow me.
Yeah.
So it's purposeful. I appreciate that. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Anytime. It's the least I could do. And
Mhm.
I kind of try to apply that same principle to podcasting. It's a weird transition, but I've heard so many stories from guests where they're like just appreciative that I even take the time to read the book because they're like there's so many people who don't even read the book or they don't know anything about the guest. And I try to view this as like a combination of like a personal and professional. And when we talk about building that trust, I want to build that relatability. I want to make the conversations fun. And I'm trying to build that skill set every single repetition, every single conversation,
That's it.
make it more fun for the guests and actively take the time to read about them, to just indulge myself in their life. And, one of the things that I read about and I saw over and over again was your mother.
Mm,
And that relationship to me, it just stuck out so much.
mm,
And I wanted to finish off talking about two really important things. And the first one being your mother. And I had read something. I just want to get your insight, just anecdotes, because to me, it again, we talked all about relationships, and this
yeah.
relationship sounded to me like it meant the most to you. And I just want to hear stories about it. And I found this online. I was reading about your mother, and it said that one of her favorite hobbies, or two of them, was that she loved to garden and that she loved to make stained glass art. And I didn't know if you have any stories about doing that with her and just the joy that came with that, or just any general stories about it just being with your mother.
You, my friend, have done some research. Holy cow! You know, she did love to garden. She did love to make stained glass. As a matter of fact, on the shelf behind me, I've got a little kaleidoscope that she made me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, she was boy, she was a mentor. She was a role model. She was a confidant. She was a lot of things to a lot of people. And you talk about legacy. My mom was a secretary for a manufactured housing company, and a sales role opened up in a territory that nobody wanted. And she said, "Hell, I'll do it. Just give me a chance. Give
Yeah.
me a chance." and she threw her hand up, and 20, 30, I don't know, 30 years later, she ran a factory. Um, she was she was everything to me. Yeah, for sure, man. And it's she instilled a work ethic in me that I don't think could have otherwise been given. My father, I was raised by my stepdad and my mother. My stepdad played a huge role in that as well. Um, um, and I am forever grateful for they taught me, look, dude, if I wanted a pair of Jordans, the first time, every time a new pair of Jordans would come out every year, I knew I bet I'd be out in the yard for weeks on end, busting my hump. They taught me the value of a dollar. They taught me if you want something, you must work to get it.
Yeah.
And I think that is also lost on a lot of folks today. But um, I'm a little flat-footed because that's a great question, and you have seriously done your research, man. But I think it's a sign of how committed you are to your craft and what you're
Yeah.
doing with this podcast, and which inspires me.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go back 60 seconds, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Um, you talked about if you want to drive, if you want to see change, change yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and if you want to change a culture of a company or change a vibe inside of a place, take the bull by the horns and do it, which of course, obviously I agree with. I think many listeners might hear that and say, but I'm fresh out of college and they're not going to listen to me, or I don't have the fancy title and they're not going to listen to me.
Yeah.
Um, and that might be true in some places. However, there is momentum behind legitimate, authentic, and needed transformations. Momentum can be found, and you will create a magnetism that people will follow you, whether you have a team of direct reports or not.
Yeah.
And that is, you can drive massive change without a giant team. Where am I going with all this, Tom? Is um, you, with all respect, you are at the beginning of hopefully a brilliant, beautiful career.
Yeah.
At your age, I am on part two of my professional career, and you inspire the shit out of me today. Right. And that's the point I want. And I'll say it differently. So if you want to cut it for your commercial differently, for your trailer, I'll say it differently. Um, Tom, the point I'm trying to make here though is, you're at the beginning of your career, right? By just a mathematical sake, the age that you're at, you hopefully have a brilliant, beautiful, super impactful career in front of you. I'm on the tail end of my career, certainly chapter two, and you have inspired the heck out of me today. Someone
Thank
that's
you.
gone through the research that you've gone through, you care about what you do. And if you care about what you do and you put in those repetitions, you will not succeed. Fact.
Yeah.
Fact. Um, there's some cliche that you probably know better than I do that, or I'll botch it rather, is, you know, uh, a winner is just a loser who never stopped trying.
Yep.
You get knocked down, you get up, you get knocked down, you get back up. So, thank you for that question. It got you got me a little, you got the lump in my throat, which doesn't usually happen during podcasts. Respect, really respect, man.
Thank you. And it's the least I could do to take the time to really appreciate your work and show the audience just how appreciative I am of your work. Because
Thank you.
that's the goal of me, is to have everybody who listens to this. And I wish it was more. And like you talked about, getting up every single time you get knocked down. I'm almost a year into this journey, and no, is it anywhere near where I want it to be? Absolutely not. But I'm never going
Of
to give
course.
up because I love it too much. Um,
Yeah.
and every single time I come out to do one of these things, I want to show the guests, I want to show the audience just how much I love the people who I talk with and
Yeah.
why they should fall in love with them too. And I fell in love with your work. I really hope
Thank
that this is the first of many conversations that we
Yeah.
have, either online or offline.
As do I. Hey, bud, by the way, they will pay you to lose that passion. They
Yeah,
will pay you to not come home and do a podcast at 7 o'clock at night.
yeah,
Don't let them do that.
never. Absolutely
Don't let
never.
them do
I've
that.
had
Good for
too
you.
many conversations with myself and too many conversations with peers already. They're like, why do you do this? You could be studying for any certification in the finance world that you want to. You could be taking on a higher paying job if I wanted to. And yeah, you can look at that as opportunity cost. I know we're getting kind of nerdy right now, a bit deep, but that's the opportunity cost I'm willing to pay, especially right
Yeah.
now at 23. I'll sign up for that any single day,
Respect, man.
any day.
Respect. You are the anomaly, my friend.
Thank you so much.
You
Um,
are.
This has been an awesome conversation, and I want to finish it off with I'm trying out like a new show staple conversation. Like some shows do it where they ask the same
Mhm.
guest, the same question to every guest, and mine is focused around love. So my question is,
Mm.
after all of the experiences that you've had so far, and hopefully many more, what have they taught you about love? And that's very open ended. So, love of working with people, love of family, friends, anything in between, just a general overview of love.
Well, I would say love of life in general.
Yeah.
You've got to you don't have to like everyone, everything. You don't have to agree with everyone on every position, uh, but you definitely should love the opportunities, the existence that we have because it's so fleeting.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not naive, man. Some people will hear that and say, make their judgments about how it's easy to say that, but love genuinely does make the world go round.
Yes, it does.
And that's not necessarily love from person to person. There are, loving this existence, loving the opportunities that we've been given, however fleeting they are, and taking advantage of those. Without love, um, I don't know how you have passion without love. And again, I don't mean person to person. Passion for what we do every day, passion for life, passion for helping one another.
Yeah.
So to me, it's so connected. And I that's a word. Passion's a word I use a lot. So I think the challenge for all of us is to find the love. And again, I don't mean person to person, although clearly having a group of people, friends, family, wives, husbands that are in your corner that love you, that makes everything so much more sweet.
Yes, it does.
Right. But I think you got to, and that's the challenge and the choice that has to be made. Choices that must be made is to find the things that you love, that bring you joy, that enable you to be your best in those love relationships that you have. So I just think it's everything.
Once again, a massive thank you to Kyle for joining me for that conversation. An amazing conversation with an amazing guy. And I hope you guys got a lot out of today's conversation. If you enjoyed, please follow along, leave a rating. It's the best way to help grow the show. Can't thank you enough for being a supporter. Until next time, see ya.